Okay, I think we can go ahead and get started. I want to thank everybody for joining us, most especially our speakers who've graciously agreed to help us kick off the seminar series. Just as a little bit of a background, this is going to be a 10-session series where we hope to aim to invite speakers from around the world who are leading various research projects related to global surgery. And the goal is for every session that there'll be two speakers who are both speaking on similar topics, but are also using similar methods with their work so that we can both dive into the results, but we can also dive into methods and trying to understand how to actually get this work done. I think this will be a great learning opportunity for all of us to try and understand how these projects are actually done. So we will be recording these sessions and we'll be making them available on our website. We hope that you join in person when you can, because we are trying to create a robust discussion and really learn in real time. But these will be available for your use. The other thing I want to mention is that internally we're running a complimentary journal club. So earlier this week, those of us within PGSSC discussed the articles that are going to be the focus of the presentations today. If you're interested in hosting journal clubs in other locations, we certainly encourage you to do that. And the articles will be posted on the research seminar website for you to be able to see what the focus will be and can read them ahead of time if that is useful to you. One of the real benefits of being online right now is that we're able to expand and share these learning opportunities with a broader community. It really is such a resource for us to be able to invite the speakers that we have today and coming forward. And so I just want to share with you, we invited folks to let us know where they're calling from. And I think it's really spectacular to have so many people from so many places joining us today. So again, thank you for being part of this seminar and participating in these conversations. And I'll put that link one last time in the chat so that if you weren't represented in the map, if you want to let us know where you're calling from, that would be great. I want to just acknowledge that there's a lot of folks who've really contributed to getting the seminar series off the ground, especially my colleague, Adeline Boatin, who's the co-faculty lead for the research pillar within PGSSC, and then the numerous RAs and fellows who've been really helping us behind the scenes get this off the ground. If you want to learn more about the seminar, we'll be posting the upcoming talks ahead of time at this link, hopefully the link that you found to come here. And I just want to highlight that we have the speakers for the next talk lined up. The focus will be on financial risk of surgery and looking more deeply at how to use tools to assess expenditures in those studies. And so hopefully you'll be able to join us then. So before I introduce the speakers to you, I do just want to give a few sort of background on this series today. So we'll first invite the speakers to talk. We actually ask that you hold questions for the two speakers until the very end, and we anticipate that we'll have between 20 to 30 minutes for open discussion at the end. So please do hold your questions. There will be plenty of time to ask them to the speakers. We ask that you mute yourself unless you are speaking or asking questions, just so that there's not a lot of background noise. And then finally, we are very interested in your feedback. This is our first session. This is a work in progress. And so at the very end, we have a 1-minute survey for you to just give us some feedback on this initial session that we'll incorporate as we move forward for the seminar series. We look forward to your feedback in addition to your participation. So without further ado, I am pleased to invite and introduce our first speaker, Ulrich Kamunye, who is a Global Surgery Fellow at Operation Smile. Many of us know Ulrich because he was a former research associate with the PGSSC, working on the Global Neurosurgery Initiative, the Southern African Development Community Program, and the Global Health Conference Equity Team. As the member of the Global Neurosurgery Initiative, Ulrich led the Global Neurosurgical Workforce and Infrastructure projects, Within the Southern African Development Community team, he was part of the team that helped 16 African member states develop their INSOAP plans. And then finally, as the conference equity team, he helped identify barriers faced by low and middle income country researchers at major global health conferences. Ulrich, we're happy to have you here, and I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bethany, and thanks everyone for attending. So I'm Ulrich Sidney Cameroonian, and I'll be presenting on Cameroonian medical students' knowledge and attitudes towards global surgery. Next slide, please. This is a plan. This will be a very short presentation. I'm going through how we came about the research idea, how we did it, what the findings were, and what the implications are. Next slide, please. So the background, we got the idea when we were at the Incision Global Surgery Symposium in Rwanda. So I was at that event as a speaker. I had just received an offer to be research associate at a program of global surgery and social change, and a former RA at the time and president or chair of Incision had invited me to speak at this event. That's Dominic Bergwood. That's where I met a lot of fellow friends interested in global surgery, and the question came up about what do we know of medical students' interests towards global surgery, knowledge and attitudes, and we said, well, let's try and come up with a study and evaluate that. So I just wanted to highlight this because I think that one of the things that I've learned from my experience is that if you're thinking about research in this space, you want to leverage your connections, you want to collaborate. So do not wait to be in touch with, I don't know, one of the bigger names in the field. Just start with your friends because their mentorship actually works. Next slide, please. So there has been strong medical student leadership in the global surgery space. As most of us know, there's this group called Incision, or the International Student Surgical Network, that has more than 5,000 members from all around the world. That has been very key instrumental to global surgery advocacy, research, and education. And what we really wanted to understand was, is this interest proper, or is this only due to Incision, or is this related to, is this something we can find among other medical students? So we thought about this, and we first of all asked ourselves, is this going to be quantitative or qualitative? The quant was easy to choose because it's very easy, it's quick, and it's cheap. But we'll discuss about the cost of actually coming up with a quant methodology, which, well, we'll talk about the methodology after this. Next slide, please. So how we did it, we started by leveraging a network. I really want to shout out one of the co-authors here, Onela Bokam Fenu, who was really instrumental in reaching out to all medical students via their medical schools to get them to respond to this survey. What we did for the methodology was most co-authors didn't have experience with any kind of research. So we started with free online courses. I gave some examples of these free online courses here. And the first draft, unfortunately, or fortunately, was a mess. And I think it's fine, and it's okay to acknowledge this. You don't want to be blocked by the fact that you're trying to come up with that prime page, something that is perfect from the start. You just put your ideas together on a piece of, on a document, usually a Google Doc, and then you reiterate, you read it, you get other people to give you feedback. And the more you do that, the better the paper becomes. It's also easier to get this to that final point when you read many papers. The more papers you read, the more likely you're going to be able to make this a good piece. I want to thank reviewers, because when we submitted the paper to PLOS, the reviewers absolutely shredded it, and they were right. the paper wasn't good. But more importantly, not only did they shred it, they gave positive feedback, because that's very important. And this highlights an important part of research. Contributing to global surgery research is being a reviewer. If you haven't done so, do not wait till you publish, I don't know, 50 papers to start reviewing. You can always give an opinion. If you participated in a global surgery journal club, then you have an opinion to give on a paper. So you can start by taking courses, for example, on Publons online, and registering to be a reviewer for global surgery journals. Peer mentorship is very important. Here I want to highlight a peer mentor of mine was Dominic Verwood. Like I mentioned, he was at the time he was the chair of Incision. He was a former RA. He's gone on to complete an MBA and PhD at Johns Hopkins, and now is taking on a PhD. So again, you want to reach out to your friends, colleagues, to get you honest feedback, and you want to be actively listening. You want to be humble enough to listen and to take those criticisms into consideration. Next slide, please. So what were our findings? I summarized our findings into 4 points, really. The definition of global surgery. What we found was that a lot of folks thought global surgery just meant like multidisciplinary surgery. So surgery in which you have a general surgeon, an orthopedic surgeon working together. And this perhaps was due to the fact that they weren't necessarily familiar with the concepts of global health, because the transition from global health to global surgery is easy if you already understand the definition of global health. But this says a lot about global health and global surgery in low and middle income countries, that when we think about global health and global surgery as a field, as a specialty, think about the experts and the institutions, the first thing that comes to mind is high income country institutions or authors or researchers. And the question then is, one of the questions that actually motivated this paper is, who's a global surgeon? Is it the person that has published hundreds of articles on global surgery? Is it the person offering care to people in low resource settings, although they might not know the definition of global surgery or the methodologies to come up with a research paper? And so if we recognize that there's a gap there, how do we bridge that chasm between that lack of knowledge from people who are practitioners and the lack of experience, ground experience for people who are more experienced with the theory? I don't think it's one or the other. We really need to just get everybody sitting at the same table and exchanging ideas. And then the next one was, not all the indicators are equally popular. We found out that the indicators like catastrophic health expenditure and the surgical volume were less well known. And this really highlights another chasm, because for those of us who've been in low and middle income countries, we're aware of the financial burden of surgeries. We always think about them when we want to suggest options or therapeutic solutions. We always think about them when we're speaking with our patients. So we're actually aware of the risk of financial catastrophe, but the concept as an indicator is not so well known, which is again interesting, because at the time we just had this fantastic initiative by the World Bank and the PGSSC to get indicators on the World Bank website, but perhaps that information did not disseminate through to low and middle income countries as much as we would like. The knowledge regarding landmark global surgery papers and their findings as well was quite low. Here we didn't test this per se, but I would surmise that this has to do with the lack of access to these papers, in the sense that yes, a lot of them actually were free and open access, but access just beyond that. So for example, Cameroon is a bilingual country, English and French, majoritarily French speaking. So about 80%, 20% is about is English speaking. So although English is the language for research, these papers are still difficult to access. And I remember there was I think Andrew Dowry, one of our research associates, that got all of us French-speaking research associates at PGSSC to write a document about global surgery in French. And that got so much attention. That was led by Alexandre Moussier. It got so much attention in the French-speaking LMICs. It was impressive how much people wanted to know more about global surgery, but they found it so difficult to get access to that information because of language barriers. Zineb Bentoussi at Oxford equally wrote a piece about this. And so we want to think about increasing access, not just in terms of open access, but also in terms of language. So every time we get an opportunity, if we are French speaking, Spanish speaking, we should always try to disseminate that information beyond the regular circles. And then the next finding was not really one of those like big findings, but I think it was worth highlighting here. Those who were involved previously in global surgery activities and research were more likely to know more about global surgery. And I think everyone here will be like, nothing surprising here. But now the question is, okay, we've asserted that. So how do we increase participation by medical students from low-and middle-income countries to global surgery events so that they're more aware, better prepared, better skilled to take on the global surgery challenges? And this is where we need to highlight initiatives like IGSS, which is the Incision Global Surgery Symposium, which is organized every year. It's in a different setting, different continent. So we want to encourage our colleagues and friends, medical students from low and middle-income countries to attend these kinds of events. We want to facilitate the attendance at these events. We want to contribute as well. So every time you get a chance to submit an abstract, to present, to be a guest speaker, to be a moderator, I think we should do it because this is how we bridge that gap. But also we want to involve students so that it is not just about having them as data collectors, because that's often the case. We want to get them to be involved beyond just data collection, really actively involved in the research project. And finally, this is really something important, especially at the PGSSC. We're very interested, and we're still very interested at in gender equity. And we found no significant differences between the genders. Saying again, something that we would all expect, that whether male or female, the participants were equally cognizant of the importance of global surgery and equally seeking opportunities to be involved in global surgery. Next slide, please. So in terms of implications, I think we need to reflect on this first question. What is our target as a global surgery movement, field, institution, or researcher? So who do we write for? Again, like when we're publishing an article on, say, Cameroon, we know that the official languages are French and English, and we only disseminate information in English, knowing that only 20% of the population is Anglophone or English speaking. Are we publishing for the general community, or are we publishing for the local community too? Because then if we publish for the local community, we should think about disseminating in French too. And this can be applied to a number of opportunities. So if you're thinking about a Lusophone country, a Portuguese-speaking country, you should think about having that information in Portuguese, Spanish as well. What do we advocate for too? We want to think about this because who we're advocating for will determine how we package the message, but also when, where, and why we package that message. What is the cost of equitable business in this space? Here, I added a screenshot of a receipt for this article, this specific article, for which we had to pay the open access fee, right? Just highlighted in the box there. So that is about $1,600 US to get this article published. Bear in mind that we had no funding for this. We were all low and middle income country. researchers, we tried to get it waived, but it wasn't possible. And this is a reality, even for high-income country institutions. Often they want to publish, high-income country researchers want to publish an article, they really want to get it open access, but they might not have funding grants to cover this. And so it's a bit of a tough battle. And in this situation, my position has always been, I will always go for the journal that is open access, even if it's not highly ranked or reputable, or if it's not on PubMed. That is just my stand. But I'll always try, obviously, to go for that one that doesn't ask ridiculous publishing fees. Next slide, please. So we asked the first question before, how do we increase engagement among low and middle income country medical students? This event in itself is one of them. It's free, it's open access, it's online. So this is how we increase engagement. When we come and speak at these events, when we come and ask questions at these events, when we come and share ideas at these events, we are increasing participation. But we want to, we shouldn't get trapped by the allure of online. Online also has a cost of doing business. Some people cannot afford a conference that runs an entire day. Because we're thinking about Zoom conference, we wrote a short piece on this with the conference equity team, where we found that Zoom can consume anywhere upwards of 3-4 gigabytes per hour. That's a lot for some folks in some low and middle income countries. But also online or virtual attendance precludes certain experiences. We still want to be pushing for online, but also thinking about how we can increase physical interactions. So what can we learn from our experience? Like we said earlier, just get started, don't think too much about it, and don't ask yourself too many questions. Find like-minded people, start working on whatever idea you have. Use free online sources, collaborate, be mindful of the hidden costs. Next slide, please. And that's it for me. Thanks.
Thank you, Ulrich. Your paper had a line that I had never heard before, but I thought was really helpful, in links to both you and Betty's paper, that global surgery transcends the operating room. And I just found that to be a really powerful line. So thank you for sharing your experiences with us. And if you do have questions for Ulrich, please do hold them for the end. I'm going to transition over to Betty. Betty will do her own screen share. So I think you should be able to do that now. As she's pulling that up, I want to remind you, if you've not done already, that we have a place for you to go and share with us where you are joining from. So I'm going to put that into the chat here. Betty, I don't think I'm screen sharing, but do you still see it? It is possible I'm still screen sharing.
I'm gonna try again.
Okay, if not, I can.
Yeah, I think you are. Let me try. Now I'm sharing my screen.
Okay, perfect. So I'm pleased to introduce Betty Yebrehu, who is from the Division of General Surgery at the University of Toronto. She is a second-year resident, obtained her MD in the Community and Urban Health track from George Washington School of Medicine and Health Sciences in 2020. She has clinical interests in surgical oncology and pediatric surgery, and academic interest in global surgery and diversity in medical education. In her spare time, Betty enjoys cooking, painting, and TikTok. Betty, we're really pleased to have you here, and we look forward to hearing more about your work.
Thank you so much for having me, everyone. I'm very excited to be here. I'll just ask, for those of you who are familiar with Poll Everywhere, I've put a link on the screen. I'm not sure if you could see my cursor, but it's pollev.com/beaverwho422. I just have a few audience questions that I was hoping to ask throughout the presentation. And then as mentioned by Bethany, I'm going to be talking about a project that I worked on with a few other people relating to a conversation about ethics in global surgery in Canada. Okay, and so I'll give a little background about myself. I'll learn a bit about you. I'll talk about how the project began and the project before the project, some of our methods, and also the lessons that we learned. So I believe it should automatically start to work, but I was hoping to just hear briefly from the audience, if you log into the Poll Everywhere, where you're from and what your specialty is. If it starts working, yeah. And it will automatically pop up on screen. Let me try. I can't see the chat, so if you put something there, please let me know. So I see peds surgery in Singapore, neurosurgery, Pakistan, see Ethiopia. And I think the bigger it is, that means the more people who put it. So I'm seeing like maybe general surgery and neurosurgery reoccurring, also some anesthesia. I see the United States, I see Africa, I see Asia. Okay, excellent. Thank you, everyone. What a diverse group. To tell you a little bit more about me, I kind of, as previously mentioned, I was born and raised in Toronto. My family is originally from Ethiopia, so I speak English and Amharic. I'm doing general surgery right now, but I'm kind of undecided about what my future is. And, you know, the project that we're talking about right now is all about global surgery opportunities. And so I'm asking you guys, wherever you're from, if you feel like there are formal global surgery opportunities. Okay. And obviously formal is a bit vague, so it can mean something different to each of us. But if I were to stop it right here, I'd say majority say yes, some are saying no, and then a small percent are not sure. Okay, next question. Are opportunities common in residency programs? Let's see how I do this. Okay, should start. So majority of people said there were formal fellowships in global surgery, and now we're asking about opportunities in residency programs. And so far it's a no. Let me give a few more seconds. Okay, so majority is saying no. In residency programs, there aren't opportunities. Okay. And then my last question, do you feel like in your country, there's more awareness about global surgery than there are actual opportunities? Okay, so yes, in the majority, it seems like there's more awareness than there are opportunities. Okay, and I ask you guys these questions because these were essentially the questions that I was asking myself a few years ago that led to a research project and this paper. Essentially, I was getting ready to apply to residency, and I wanted to know in Canada what kind of opportunities were there in terms of global surgery and specifically in general surgery residencies, mostly because that's the largest kind of division or like specialty in surgery, and because that's what I was applying to. So I was kind of almost selfishly motivated. But those were the questions I was seeking to answer alongside Ramya Kancherla, who's another resident in general surgery, and Dr. George Azzi, who's a pediatric surgeon at Sick Kids. This is the team. Okay, this was all done remotely. So I was in the States, Ramya and Dr. Azzi were in Canada, using information available to us. What worked really well in the Canadian context for this project is that we only have 17 residency programs. So it's a small country with a small sample size with the goal of getting 100%. well, 100% of 17 is a lot more attainable than 300 plus if the same project were to be done in the States. And we used a simple Google Forms-based survey that we distributed via email. You see on the right of the screen, we have the Royal College, we have CARMS, we basically have a database that gives us the up-to-date email of the program director for each program, as well as information about the number of residents accepted each year, where the program is, if it's classified as rural versus urban. And this is all really important background data that we didn't have to struggle to collect, okay? I'm sharing this project because it's the basis for our future project. And to share kind of the highlights, we were able to get a 100% response rate and found that of our 17 general surgery residency programs, only 3 actually had a formal program, be it a fellowship or a research track devoted to global surgery, and that many program directors thought that this was an attractive area for applicants, but weren't really rating it as something of great importance to them in their program, okay? And one thing in particular that stood out was that there were more people finding opportunities, so more residents having experiences outside of what their program could provide, kind of like what you guys said in your answers to the previous questions, but that there was very little pre and post experience training, debriefing, conversations. And so it made us think, maybe there's a large proportion or group of residents who are from Canadian general surgery programs going abroad, going to different countries, but not being adequately trained to do so. Okay. And, you know, we felt pretty good about ourselves. We published the data. We had a very passionate principal investigator who individually followed up with programs who did not complete the survey right away. And as I said earlier, our country of choice, Canada, and how our information is available to us, so the contact information for PDs and what programs we have, all of that being so accessible really, I feel like, added to the success of the project. And so having collected this data from 17 out of 17 programs, we were kind of wondering if there was anything else that we could do with it. And I think it froze. Okay. We asked ourselves, is there more than one data or more than one project that we could publish with this? And so I want to ask, have you ever used the same data set for more than one paper? So far, we're tied with the no's and yeses. A few more yes. Okay. The reason why I asked this is because in clinical research or in global surgery research that's relying on large data sets, it's a lot easier to publish a bunch of different papers answering, similar or sometimes even unique research questions. But if you're trying to begin a more nuanced discussion or research something that isn't really well established in the literature, it can often feel like file definitions. It can often feel like you have to go back and collect data again, as opposed to working with what you have. And I think if you're limited by time, by funding, etc., it can be difficult to recommit to doing another IRB, data collection period, etc. Okay. And similarly, as a segue to where I'm going with this, when you hear ethics in global surgery, what are the buzzwords that come to mind? So those key little snippets. Okay, low middle income countries, sustainability and representation for sure. Accountability, like program evaluations, local, which kind of brings me back to the LMIC piece. Not burdening people, humanitarianism, collaboration for sure. Bidirectional relationships. So a lot of answers centering on how we build relationships with people, how we, keep those relationships as sustainable, as bidirectional as possible, and how we work to use the resources that we have love to hear decolonization. So important. So to bring you into the mindset and combine everything that we've talked about, we had basically a question about how we could discuss ethics in global surgery using the information that we had in an organized way. And our program, or our principal investigator, Dr. Azzi, actually came across this internal medicine paper. So a group of internal medicine physicians came together and published a practice guideline or position paper about short-term global health experiences and what they felt like was required for them to be as ethical or sustainable as possible. And we're in the general surgery category, but there's still so much to learn from your colleagues in other disciplines. And this is me, paraphrasing, but essentially they had 5 positions. The first one basically said that, the benefits of this experience must outweigh the potential risks and the burdens on host families, which is similar to 2. So, you need to partner and collaborate with locals, try not to financially burden them, take away learning opportunities, etc. You need to be culturally competent, culturally sensitive. You should absolutely have pre-departure training. This one was like the least vague. They said it's a must or it's not an ethically approached trip. And then finally, they said that you need to work with organizations that in and of themselves are practicing ethically and professionally wherever they're located, okay? And we really thought that these were applicable across specialties and said, okay, how can we compare these pillars to the information that we got in our survey? Okay. And I've just highlighted the pre-departure preparation is a must again, because if you remember the previous study that we did, we basically found that we're rarely available. And so we already found like a gap in what was available in Canada from what these physicians had stated. Okay. And so the timeline is that we did the data collection for the opportunities in Canadian general surgery residencies project. We kind of finished publishing or collecting the data, analyzing it, put together a manuscript. Similar kind of overlap between finding this internal medicine paper on ethics and then decided to revisit our data and see how we could kind of start a new conversation about ethics. Okay. And it's very subjective, like they gave their positions and we compared them to what we had seen, and we had to look closely and be creative because we had subjective, like multiple or free text, as well as the objective multiple choice ranking type of questions. Okay. And we always had to keep in mind that the data wasn't collected with this intention, but it didn't mean that we still couldn't have a unique kind of conclusion or analysis to provide. And so in the actual paper, we went position by position and did a summary that was a bit detailed about everything that they had stated in the position paper and whether or not it was addressed in our paper. And you can see, like, we had to be very clear. This was not explicitly addressed, neither was this, and that kind of reoccurred. But in general, for each of the findings or each of the positions, we were able to make some conclusions or have a bit of a discussion about what our program directors saw versus what was suggested. And so to provide kind of like a highlight, the position 1 with the benefits having to outweigh the potential risks, we basically saw that when we asked program directors, what's the goal here of a global surgery opportunity or program, the majority said that it's resident education. And some, it should say 6 out of 15 who answered, said capacity building and educating local stakeholders. And it really goes to show the difficulty in balancing resident education and learning with being able to ensure that your priority are local community stakeholders, regardless of whether or not that's rural Canada or abroad, okay? Position 2, how are you limiting your burden on hosts? It was kind of difficult to explicitly get at this, but we kind of looked at funding opportunities as a proxy, and nobody mentioned any funding for local communities. And people who did mention funding for participants said that it was not only a barrier to their participation, but it was only available at less than half of our programs, okay? And when you're not able to secure funding, which is obviously a long-term, not unique problem, you are in some ways definitely burdening not only the participants, but the hosts that they're working with. Okay. And there's a lot of talk about collaboration, but not really any mention about how explicitly the participants would be able to build those skills. Our position 3, which should be like the most obvious, you have to be culturally sensitive. It was actually never mentioned in our data, never explicitly or implicitly mentioned, and it kind of came as a surprise to us. Position 4, you must have pre-departure preparation. We did ask this explicitly, and it was only available, again, at less than half of our institutions. And we also asked, when people come back from these experiences, what's available? And again, like half, less than half, have opportunities to debrief about an experience for their participants. Okay. Finally, you have to work with organizations that are ethically and professionally operated. And we did ask the kinds of partnerships that exist. So people had partnerships between universities, with NGOs, one with a religiously affiliated organization, between hospitals, et cetera. But how these relationships are established, how the relationships are analyzed to ensure that they are evolving ethically over time, that they're bidirectional, that they're using a decolonial, forgetting the word, lens, none of that was discussed. And, this could be because of how we ask the questions, and it could also be because these are not actually factors that are being considered, okay? And if I were to summarize, everything I just said, only 4 of the 5 positions from from our position paper that we used as a reference were discussed, and cultural competence and humility was not mentioned in our results. We see the ongoing challenges in balancing trainee education with, having stakeholder focused goals and project kind of outcome measures. We see that there's no universally available, or even like available in the majority, pre-departure training. Funding, of course, is a barrier. And again, the question of how partnerships between universities or with different organizations are established and evaluated is unclear. Audience question. So using the grading scale A, B, C, D, based on what I said, how would you grade kind of the ethics or the overall performance of the Canadian global surgery opportunities? C, okay. Straight away, no holding back, a D. So it looks like C is kind of in the winner, or in the lead here. I don't think that's going to change. And I feel like I agree, probably. We didn't give them a grade because there's no grading system yet. But obviously, there's a lot more work to be done, to say the least. Okay. We tried to take this perspective of more work needing to be done and provided some recommendations that kind of center on having a shared definition of what a global surgery experience is, establishing criteria to create ethically sound and culturally sensitive experiences, making sure that we're always assessing our impact, assessing our relationships, assessing how participants are, engaging with these opportunities, work on having more funding, and then mandatory pre-departure and post-departure training and conversations. Okay. As I said, this is a small sample size, and even though it was 100%, it's very difficult to have a high-powered study with only 17 people. And we don't know if the answers would have changed if we had specifically collected data around ethics. However, we still feel like this generated a really interesting conversation, and is kind of a starting point for future conversations, future research, and future program implementation. Okay. stepping outside the research itself, I would say that our biggest lessons learned is choose your study population wisely. See how much data you can collect collect from the internet, other sources, databases before jumping into your survey. And if you're sending out a survey, feel free to have somebody in a position of power like an attending, a principal investigator who's passionate and who can use their relationships with people to pressure them into filling it out, if that's allowed. And then don't be afraid to incorporate qualitative research into global surgery, because I think that especially as we're discussing, so having these qualitative, discussions about ethics, there's a really big role for this. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Betty. A lot of the lessons learned that you highlighted came up in some of our journal club discussion. And so I'm sure we will explore those more with you. We're going to open up now to the discussion part of the seminar. And as we do that, Betty, do you mind to stop screen share?
Yes, sorry.
Oh, no, it's totally fine. Just a few points I want to make before we move into the discussion. So Betty, Ulrich, and I all agreed we prefer or welcome you to call us on a first name basis. So just let us know who you're directing the question to, but no need for formalities in that. I invite you to use the raise hand feature just so that we can make sure that we can see if you have a question and call on you. And when you do raise your question, we would love to hear for you to just give a quick introduction of who you are, where you're calling from, just so we have an opportunity to get to know you better. I think a lot of you have your videos off, which is probably better for bandwidth. If your video does allow, feel free to come on video when you ask your question. So thank you, everybody. And as sort of the privilege of being a speaker, I'm going to first invite Ulrich to see if he has any thoughts or questions after hearing Betty's talk, and we'll invite Betty to join into the discussion, and then we'll open it up to others. So please do raise your hand if you have something you want to ask. Ulrich, over to you.
Thank you so much. Fantastic work and presentation. So have you ever, Betty, have you ever struggled with that duality of being Canadian and Ethiopian within a project where, you have that perspective from a high-income country, but you still have the feeling like I guess it's not feeling completely understood by both parties, where you can be working with an LMIC and it's almost like you're the HIC person, you're working with the HIC folks and it's like you're the LMIC person. And can you maybe discuss how these ethical conundrums help you, maybe that duality helps you solve these ethical conundrums?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So yeah, my family's from Ethiopia. My dad's actually there now. And I was always interested in global health because a lot of parents who come from LMICs tell their children that you have an obligation to your community to use whatever skills you develop in Canada, the US, wherever, and contribute to the society back home. I've had to do a lot of work to make sure that I'm not using a colonial mindset I developed while in Canada and applying that to Ethiopia. But also, I was in high school in the era where people were doing global health trips to Ethiopia, to Tanzania, like all the time. That was the highlight of their summer, always posting pictures of like the little kids. So I used to take it personally because you don't associate with Black people in Canada, let alone going over there posting pictures of kids for clout. So it did used to really bother me a lot. And I think I've tried to take the approach of having conversations, using research, engaging with like-minded individuals, because I find it's much more fulfilling to have those conversations, and then bringing people into those conversations when they're ready. So yeah, I've definitely experienced that duality. And I wonder for you, because you've spent time in the United States, how that has kind of similarly affected you, or if you've had a different perspective.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I have a very good friend whom I met at a program in global surgery, Desmond Chupam. We have these conversations like about decolonizing global health. On the one hand, you're out there saying, hey, HICs, stop having this colonial mindset, but you also have to call out your own folks, because you hear about these programs or projects being implemented, and corruption is the foundation of the project, or poor governance, and it's tough. It's tough for you to go and say, hey, HIC, back off a little bit, no micromanagement, we can do this. And then the next thing you know, you hear about some really disastrous project back home. Yes, I have struggled with it. And it's tough. There's always that ethical question of what say Abimbola called the foreign gaze. I might be born in Cameroon, but it doesn't mean every single situation that relates to Cameroon I have an insider's perspective. Sometimes I'm just not the right person to give an opinion on the situation. Yeah, thanks.
And Betty, did you have any other additional questions you wanted to pose to Ulrich before we open it up to others?
I think I'm curious to hear what other people have to say, or if they have any other questions.
Excellent. So with that cue, we'll open it up. Feel free to raise your hand or jump in. Please go ahead, John.
Thank you. I want to thank Betty and Ulrich. That was just fantastic. Really great presentations, and had me thinking about our program and what we should be doing better. And also, Adeline and Bethany, thank you for creating this platform for this symposium, this research conference. I think this is a great idea, and I look forward to seeing more of these. Betty, in your presentation in particular, it got me thinking about our own program here. And you mentioned something about how does a program assess what it's doing? And so it started me thinking, how should, for example, we be assessing our relationship with all of our partners? Because I'm thinking about probably 8 or 10 or more partners that we have in the PGSSC that we work with on an annual basis. And your presentation led me to think, maybe on an annual basis, that should there be something that we're doing formally to assess that partnership and getting their feedback as well, our partners' feedback in terms of how we're doing. Do you have any thoughts on how we could do that better?
Thank you for the question. I really feel like this is an ongoing area of reflection for myself as I become more involved in different programs. I personally am on the mindset that there's 2 domains that you should be collecting feedback. One is on the participant or trainee level, and then another is looking at the outcomes that you set for the program in general. And I feel like when I'm looking at the participant level, I think it should be based on kind of cultural preferences. So even though this is about usage of surveys, I would think to myself, in some cultures, the focus group or discussion-based feedback would be a much more effective tool. And now that everybody's so comfortable using Zoom with like an anonymous or like a non-faculty moderator, that might be a great tool. Surveys are also obviously great. And I think whenever you have turnover of participants, that's a great time to do it. And then from like the actual program level, I don't think I have an excellent answer. I think it depends on what your goals are, and each relationship you build with an organization, I feel like, is rooted in a different goal. But if it's specifically about education, then I feel like you're looking at much more long-term data collection to assess efficacy of the program itself, and you rely more on the annual, or however often it is, discussions with the people who are participating to ensure that the experience is fruitful, challenging, etc. So yeah, I'm of those 2 minds.
Well, thank you. And I don't have a quick and easy answer either, but I'm thinking about it now because, as I said, we work collaboratively with a number of partners, and I'm not sure how we should be assessing ourselves on an annual basis at a programmatic level. Obviously, you talked about a project level, and I think that is easier to get your head around. But I was thinking about with UGHE and a baby. I was just talking to him earlier this morning. So how should Robert Riviello and Bethany and I and the whole team be assessing our relationship with them, or with any of our partners? So I'll keep thinking about that, but it was great to hear your input, and thank you for bringing all that forward.
Thank you.
So, hi everyone, I'm Barnabas Alandi, one of the fellows at the PGSSC. There are a few questions that came up in the course of our discussion, and I'd like to direct them to both Ulrich and Betty. The question of the IRB process, was there anything particular to implementing this online that you have to take into consideration? Or did you have a concept process, and then how long did the whole IRB process take? So maybe to you, Betty, and then Ulrich.
I think our IRB process took about 5 months. I think when you're doing online surveys with physicians who are not trainees, they're not a vulnerable population. So I think it makes it easier to get your approval. And then the specific to your question about using online surveys, I actually don't feel like that was a special consideration. We just had to address how we were going to keep our data secure on the online platform, or because we weren't asking personal information about people's health, we were asking about programs, and a lot of it is somewhat publicly available. It made it easier again to say that this is not confidential information. So that, I guess, was unique to our project. If you're going to be using online surveys, having a platform that does keep data secure is probably one of the biggest things that you would find. I don't know what is free, because I know a lot of institutions use things like REDCap for clinical data in the States, but that's a really good question that I can work on answering.
Thank you. Ulrich, any insight from your end? Okay, and then kind of the question also was raised, how did you design the survey questions, and did you think of sending them to residents and local stakeholders? But I think it has come out that some of the information was actually not specific to that question initially. But what do you think, if we had another opportunity to do the research or do the work again, would you think of involving residents or even the stakeholders at the sites where these global surgery outreaches, for instance, and programs take their residents to?
I think if I was trying to answer a question about whether or not a particular program or particular initiative had an ethical framework or mindset, then it would be really, I think, valuable to have data from the people at the University of Toronto, because that's where I am, and the people who are involved with the program in whatever place it is, and being able to not only compare their different perspectives, but at least understand how they view the program in and of itself. Because we were using data collected from a previous survey, that's not something that we could do for this project, but I do think it would be really valuable. And I mean, if you're trying to make a very bold statement about whether or not something is ethical without including the people that are being impacted by it, then I would ask, is your project ethical? How are you trying to ask a more specific question, because all perspectives or most perspectives should be ideally represented.
Thank you so much, Betty.
It looks like Ulrich was able to jump back online. Ulrich, I don't know if you caught the original question from Barnabas or not.
No, sorry. Immediately as John started speaking, I lost the internet connection.
Oh, Okay, Ulrich. The question came up about the IRB process. Was there anything particular to implementing this online that you had to take into consideration? Then did you have like a consent process, and how long did it take you to get the IRB?
Well, thanks, Barnabas. That is an amazing question. IRBs are a nightmare in one of the countries because, for example, in Cameroon, the ethics committee at the national level meets maybe once a year, and when they do, usually it's complete randomized control trials. So yes, it's an issue. What we found is that when we do surveys, we often are able to get waivers for the IRB, so it's a much quicker process. We do them through the medical school, often as part of an end of year project, either a thesis or another dissertation. So that makes it just so much quicker, because if it's an independent project, then it just puts it on the back of the Bunsen burner. So it's just it was actually quicker for this project with the survey. In terms of ethical concerns, we tried as much as possible, always when we are putting together surveys, to get them vetted by experts, so that we can get some feedback on that. But we also get feedback from the ethics committee. But with this one, we didn't have any particular concerns, because there was no threat to anonymity or to the survey respondents' integrity in any way. At least that's what the consensus was.
Thanks, sorry.
Thank you, Ulrich. Before I call on Joey to ask his question, I had a question from someone participating sent directly to me, and it's for you, Betty, asking if you have any details about the respondents, and specifically the person was asking about the ethnic makeup of those who responded, and if you saw any associations between the respondents' details and their perceptions of global surgery.
That is a really, really good question. I'm working on a project right now that's actually aiming to characterize more of the demographic data about Canadian gen-surg programs. Long story short, not really. I don't really know their demographics. And because of that, I can't say definitively how that would have impacted responses. However, I don't think that using a name is always the best tool for determining gender or ethnic ethnicity. But the majority of the participants were male. I don't want to comment on their race. I'm not sure. I can imagine, but I'm not sure. But definitely male. Excellent future research question.
Thank you. Yogi, I'll invite you to chime in. And you're on mute. Yogi, sorry, you're on mute.
Still on mute?
Nope.
Excellent talks, Ulrich and Betty. Thank you so much. I took notes and learned a few things. 1990, I was embarrassed to be invited to International Society of Pediatric Neurosurgery meeting to talk about cost-effective hydrocephalus management. Had a beautiful talk prepared, and thank God my talk was on the third day. It was so embarrassing because coming from the West, talking in Argentina about how to save money was totally useless. So I had to change my talk. In those days, we still had the slides. So I had to wing it and say, look, this is wrong. This is not coming from the West telling you guys what to do. My time in Uganda, India, Ukraine, other places, I go there and I have learned more than I have served. And I think that's kind of lost. And Betty, your talk pointed that out very appropriately. Next month is the Congress of Neurological Surgeons. I don't know if Gail is on and Key, they're both on. We three will be participating in global neurosurgery panels. And then I'm going to be partly heading up a neurotrauma symposium global. I would like to see, as to John Mira's points, how can we bring in this ethics bilaterality. How can we include that type of things in everything we do? I lead you to Vigneshwar's paper we shared earlier this year, how to not come down from the West in a preaching mode. Key and I are working on something else, and we really are learning. Betty and Ulrich, both of you, how do we incorporate that into our upcoming Congress of Neurological Surgeons meetings and anything we do forward to put that ethical, fair share business? Thank you.
I think that's a really important but tough question. I feel like you could approach it from many different ways, taking like a step out when you're looking at the types of, abstracts that are being accepted, what is being given like a tract or special emphasis in a meeting. Even introducing to people the idea of like an ethics stream will prompt a lot of discussion, will prompt possibly people submitting different pieces of work that they might not have previously. I think that having people in the field be invited to be on panels or to moderate sessions when they have a history of being kind of critical or outspoken about these issues is good, because it challenges people to think differently in the moment. And I think a lot of, and maybe this is my bias, but a lot of younger trainees, I think, are more familiar with these discussions around ethics and are involved in using their voice, and having them represented and empowering them in a way where they feel like they can ask questions. Those are some things that I feel like might be helpful in the short term.
Ulrich, did you have any thoughts to add to that?
Yes, thank you. I think defer to the experts in the sense that there is a lot of great work with regards to global surgery and ethics coming out of Canada. I remember while working with the conference equity group, we met with folks from various universities there that have come up with frameworks and guidelines and can advise on this concept. Dr. Batsabo, when you mentioned Dr. Rousseau, I remember that there is a fellow, Dr. Rousseau works with Nathan Schlovin, who's an ethics expert, I'd say, so we can help with that as well.
Thank you.
Can I also just add really quickly? So the inspiration for our ethics paper came from an internal medicine paper. I think, as we focus more on collaboration, if you feel like there's an outspoken voice in ethics in a different, probably surgical discipline, then I think it's worth involving them, if you feel like they have a perspective to share, because we learned so much reading that internal medicine perspective, and we're able to apply a lot of the principles to general surgery.
Thank you to both of you. I'm going to call on Masunga, and then after that, Megan. So please go ahead, Masunga.
Hi, good morning. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. I'm Masunga. I'm a medical student at Wright State University and currently on a gap year getting my MPH at UNC. And I just wanted to say thank you all so much for creating this space where those of us who are kind of new to global surgery can come and learn a little bit more about what people are doing in terms of research. And thank you to Betty and Ulrich for fantastic presentations. My first question is for Ulrich regarding your methodology. I was actually just curious as to your study population, why senior medical students as opposed to, surveying all medical students or the underclassmen versus like the clinical students. I just wanted your take on that. And then my question for Betty, regarding, you mentioned the idea of pre-trip training and culture training. Some of the work that we've been doing over at Wright State has also kind of found that pre-trip training might be beneficial. And I just wanted to get a sense of, what are your thoughts on what pre-trip training should look like?
Or do you want to start?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much. Fantastic question. We were just trying to make sure we're comparing likes for likes. So senior medical students already have had clinical experience, whereas underclassmen have not. So if you ask them a question about surgery, often they don't necessarily understand.
Ulrich, unfortunately, we're losing the connection. So Betty, can I invite you to respond to your question, and then we can go back to Ulrich if he can get a stronger connection.
Yeah, so you can correct me if I'm wrong. The question was...
I'll just rephrase. The question was regarding pre-departure training and like post-departure return training. Just wanted your thoughts on, what do you envision that looking like, and who do you think should be like involved in those conversations?
So outside of the global surgery context, there has been data published from multiple like global health perspectives that doing pre-departure training increases the kind of success, the educational value for participants. I don't think it's been studied from the perspective of stakeholders and whether or not people who have had adequate or some pre-departure training improves their experience, but there is a documented benefit. When we initially collected our survey data, we asked specifically like what kind of pre-departure training was available. Was it stuff about, communities, culture, history? Was it just travel health? Was it relating to like the project itself? And the results were very mixed. I imagine that any pre-departure training has an element of customization to the communities that you are going to be kind of working with or involved with, and then also covers kind of like ethics, like you're talking to them about that, things about how to stay within your scope. I think one thing that will hopefully become increasingly popular is some type of accountability measure. So how can we anonymously report things we see that are not, I'm saying health hazards, but you feel like harmful practices, and how to kind of debrief about those. And then the basic stuff about like, oh, this is the healthcare system, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's a multifaceted educational approach that includes ethics, includes safety, and includes an element of customization.
Thank you. And Ulrich's chatted a few of his responses around the selection. So we'll come back to him if he has something to add in the next set of questions. We have a hand up from Megan and then from Ala, and I am looking at the clock and guessing that these will be our last question. So Megan, we'll invite you to ask your question, and then we'll hand it over to Ala after the responses.
Thank you, Betty, and thank you, Ulrich, for the presentations. I just have a question about medical, like integrating global surgery education into medical training. What do you see as the future of global surgery education, whether it's in medical school training or residency training, or even in fellowships? I know you mentioned about pre-departure training. Is there anything else that we can do to improve the uptake of global surgery in residencies, perhaps?
I think a lot of North American residency programs have didactics incorporated into, so like lecture-based teaching incorporated into weekly activities. So, I mean, one of the easiest things would be to include a presentation series, seminar similar to this into the didactics that people have to expose them to the field, but I think also expose them to the concepts of global surgery being more than just LMICs, particularly in the Canadian context when we have a very, very large rural population, and there are so many accessibility issues for healthcare. I think that having a formal opt-in program for global surgery is also really nice. So at University of Toronto, we have a global health program that you can do, which includes a lecture series as well as a project. And then they have a global surgery track that you, if you're a surgical trainee, can participate in. And I think, you know, the longer these options are around, the more people are likely to participate, especially, I think, especially as global surgery becomes more popular. I think that also takes the pressure off of people for feeling like they have to do, an experiential type learning thing, or they have to go somewhere in rural Canada, and gives them an opportunity to focus on, theory, health equity, like some concepts that are only just now becoming increasingly taught in medical education.
Ulrich, did you want to add to that?
Yes, I was just going to say that there are great examples in the US. For example, Baylor, that has a great program as well. I think that's the future.
And then over to you, Ala, for your question, please.
Okay, my question is really simple, Betty. First, thank you for your presentation. Thank you to everyone. I'm just wondering what's the question that led you to ask this question? I mean, what was the passion behind such a paper? What led you to do such a research?
I think for the ethics project, it was kind of spurred by the internal medicine paper, and us noticing that specifically in our data, people did not have widely available pre-departure training opportunities, and seeing such a large gap and something so clearly identified in this internal medicine paper as a necessary component of an ethical global surgery experience made us feel like there was more to discuss or uncover. So it was kind of random, basically. One thing led to another. I think that I'm somebody, and I'm sure Ramya, who's the other resident on the paper, as well as Dr. Azzi, have an interest in these topics in general, but it's very hard if you don't feel like there's a lot of published data or frameworks to use as your baseline to start a discussion or comparison. So I think we're kind of like, well, we have to start from somewhere, so let's start here.
Ulrich, can you comment on your motivation for the study?
Yes, thanks. I will quote John on this. If you have a comment, a question, anything to share, write it up. Anything about the topic, and then what you have to do is meet someone that can help you come up with the right research question and the right methodology.
Thank you. I'm just conscious of the time, and so I want to invite Betty and Ulrich to just give any final comments or thoughts that have come up in today's presentations. And then if everyone can just hold out, I do have 2 minutes of announcements at the end. So Betty, we'll let you start. Any final thoughts?
I just wanted to say thank you to you and Adeline for organizing this and inviting me. I really enjoyed the discussion. And I look forward to collaborating with everyone, talking to you guys on Twitter in the future. So thank you again for having me.
Same here. Thanks, everyone. Fantastic.
Okay, well, on that, we really appreciate you kicking this off and really setting the stage for what we hope these talks to look like in the future. I do just have a few closing announcements for you. First of all, I want to just acknowledge and appreciate all of you who've joined. I think it's such a privilege to be able to hear voices from all over the world, and just am really grateful for the participation and the questions. We hope that you will join us in the future. Ulrich, in your talk, you talked about some of the different societies and groups that really try to bring in engagement in global surgery. And one of the things that you can do to help us, and this is to everyone, not just to Ulrich, is to help us identify those groups that we can send out information about the seminar. So please email to me or Adeline or others in PGSSC if there's others that you want to make sure that we send information about the seminar. On that note, just a reminder that the next seminar will be October 14th. If you got into this link, you are automatically registered for the next ones, and we'll try to send you reminders. So that registration is good for the whole series. So you do not need to register again. if you already registered for the seminar. Finally, we do ask, this is a work in progress. We do ask that you complete a very brief survey. I'm putting the link to the survey in the chat. It shouldn't take you more than 1 or 2 minutes. So we do kindly ask that you complete the survey. We're trying to make sure that we improve as we go through the series, if there's any feedback that you have for us. So on that note, I just want to thank you, and we'll leave the room open for a few minutes in case there's any last thoughts or questions, but look forward to seeing you next month.